Hey guys, I'm Nathan from Arms and Armor. Today I want to show you our 12th century sword, which is a relatively early example of a hand and a half or long sword. In period, these were probably called great swords. This is a type XIIa sword that derived from earlier Viking style swords. One of the things that it still has in common with earlier Viking swords is this long, broad fuller that runs the length of the blade, as well as this faceted wheel pommel, which is very similar to a bunch of later Viking swords, right? Like late 10th century, kind of like there are a bunch of finds from Lapaho that have similar pommels, and then the cross on this, they called it a spike hilt at the time. So the main differences between this and an earlier Viking sword are, of course, that the blade is quite a bit longer and that the grip is much longer. So here, this is our Schiffered Viking sword. You can compare these. This one, it's not quite done yet. There's no leather on the grip. But this is a classic Viking sword from a couple hundred years earlier. You can see how tight the fit is in my hand. But the blade has a similar overall shape, except that these type 12s started to get substantially pointier. So these classic Viking swords usually have a more rounded point, which suggests that they're probably mostly for cutting relatively lightly armored foes, probably with a shield most of the time. And then, once you get these type 12s and type 12As, you start to get more taper in the blade out to more of a point, which probably has something to do with changing ways of fighting and changing armor technology from the 10th century into the 12th century. So with this great sword, you could use it one-handed, right? For example, if you were mounted or if you had a shield, it moves just fine like that. But it really works well in two hands. That's what this sword's probably primarily meant for fighting on foot in armor. Now, one of the reasons you could put two hands on a sword is that you're wearing better armor than had previously existed, so you didn't necessarily have to have a shield in your other hand to protect yourself, right? So if you are wearing armor, you can use a sword in two hands. All of a sudden this sword becomes much more powerful, much faster, right? And much more maneuverable because you can really move it around with that leverage. Now these blades are also quite stiff, right? So these great swords, I would argue, tend to be substantially stiffer than later long swords, especially when you start to get into, for example, the 15th century. Some of those long swords they're essentially fillet knives because you really weren't killing someone in Gothic plate armor with a sword very readily. And therefore, the swords could be used for slaying all the people who weren't armored, right? But these guys, these type 12s, are substantially rigid. This thing weighs 3.3 pounds, so it is a substantial sword, right? But it moves really well. The point tracks nicely. It has really good presence in the cut. It's a lovely piece. This one has a mottled green leather grip on it, which is one of our options. You can see the shape of the end of the sword there. That nice fuller. So it's a sword from a really interesting period in European history, and it reflects a lot of the changes that were ongoing in this kind of rat race of constantly improving armor and constantly improving weapons. So, got a link below. Check it out. Thank you.